Friends, listen, lean in. There's a whisper that runs through nations, through homes, through the chambers of our own hearts. The fast of silence is one of the most underestimated yet most powerful disciplines a person can practice. Because silence is not emptiness, it is fullness. In a world where everything screams for attention, where notifications, conversations, and constant noise drown out the voice within, stepping into silence is like entering a battlefield where the enemy can no longer hide behind distraction. Demons do not fear loud voices or endless chatter. They fear stillness, because stillness is where the real strength begins to grow. When you decide to quiet the world and lay down the endless cycle of talking, explaining, and defending yourself, you create space for the truth to rise to the surface. Silence is not weakness. It is a sharpened blade that cuts through confusion and reveals what has been buried under the noise. Most people are uncomfortable with silence because in the quiet they come face to face with themselves. The thoughts they avoid, the fears they suppress, and the questions they never answer begin to echo louder when the noise fades away. But that is exactly why silence is powerful. It exposes lies and brings clarity. The enemy thrives in distraction, in keeping people busy with small talk, endless scrolling, and constant stimulation. But when you fast from noise, you deny the enemy his hiding place. You step into a sacred space where your spirit becomes more sensitive, your mind becomes more alert, and your soul begins to recognize the whispers of truth that were always there, waiting to be heard. When you practice the fast of silence, it is not about simply being mute or shutting your mouth. It is about intentionally creating an atmosphere where you can listen, observe, and discern. It means putting down the phone, turning off the television, stepping away from social media, and refusing to fill every quiet moment with more chatter. In those silent moments, you begin to notice patterns in your thoughts. You start to hear the still small voice that brings wisdom, and you find strength that does not come from human words. Silence teaches discipline, because you learn to resist the urge to fill the void with anything but truth. The enemy fears silence because it removes his ability to manipulate you with distractions. If he cannot get you through noise, arguments, and constant stimulation, then he has no power over your focus. And when your focus sharpens, your authority grows. Think about it. The greatest leaders, prophets, and warriors all knew the value of retreating into silence before stepping into action. They understood that silence was not absence, it was preparation. It was in the stillness that they received strength for the battle, direction for their journey, and clarity for their mission. By fasting silence, you reclaim power over your attention. You learn to control your environment instead of letting your environment control you. You no longer live enslaved to every noise, every notification, every conversation demanding your energy. Instead, you stand rooted, calm, and unshaken. That is why silence is terrifying to darkness. It produces unshakable clarity and unbreakable peace in those who dare to embrace it. The fast of surrender is one of the most difficult yet one of the most liberating practices a person can choose. It is not about giving up for the sake of pain, but about releasing control in order to step into a greater strength. We live in a culture that teaches us to cling tightly to everything. Our possessions, our habits, our opinions, even our pain. We believe holding on gives us power, but in reality, the more we cling, the more we become chained. Surrender is terrifying to the human ego because it feels like losing, but in truth, it is winning on a deeper level. It is the decision to say, I no longer serve what controls me. I no longer live as a prisoner to my own cravings or my own comfort. When you fast through surrender, you are not punishing yourself. You are breaking chains that you never realized were weighing you down. Every appetite has the power to dominate if left unchecked. Food, entertainment, money, recognition, relationships. None of these things are bad in themselves, but when they own you, they become your master. The fast of surrender is about letting go of the things that subtly dictate your choices and consume your attention. It might be giving up a food you crave, a habit that soothes you, or even a distraction that makes you feel secure. It is not about the size of what you surrender, but about the significance of what it represents. By letting it go, you remind yourself that nothing owns you, and everything you need flows from a higher source. Demons fear this because surrender eliminates their leverage. They cannot tempt someone who has already given up the very thing they are using as bait. When you practice surrender, you enter into a radical humility. You recognize that your strength is not in your grip, but in your release. You stop striving to control outcomes and instead align yourself with purpose. This does not make you weaker, it makes you stronger, because you are no longer divided inside. A surrendered heart is a whole heart, and a whole heart is unstoppable. There is clarity in knowing that you are no longer torn between chasing what you want and obeying what is right. The fast of surrender brings a freedom that cannot be explained until it is experienced. This discipline also builds courage. It takes bravery to let go of the very thing you believe you cannot live without. At first, there is resistance, a fear that you are missing something essential. But with time, that fear fades, and in its place grows a confidence that you are more than your cravings. You discover new strength rising inside, and you realize that surrender is not about loss. It is about gain. You gain peace, you gain focus, you gain authority. What once owned you no longer has power over you, and that is terrifying to the forces that thrive on your weakness. In surrender, you declare to yourself and to the unseen world that your identity is not built on what you hold, but on what you release. The fast of surrender strips away pride, silences fear, and restores power. It is not the end of freedom, it is the beginning of it. The fast of fire is the collision of hunger and prayer, a discipline that ignites the spirit with unstoppable force. It is not a casual act, not a ritual performed out of routine, but a deliberate declaration of war against the things that hold you back. When you combine fasting with focused, intentional prayer, you are no longer playing defense. You are advancing into territory that darkness thought it owned. This is why demons fear it so deeply, because it is not just abstaining from food or comfort. It is targeting strongholds with spiritual precision. It is choosing a mountain in your life and refusing to walk away until it moves. The fast of fire transforms hunger into fuel, turning weakness into power and desperation into breakthrough. This kind of fasting is different because it is focused. It is not just skipping meals or saying a few scattered prayers. It is about identifying a specific battle, a destructive habit that refuses to break, a generational curse that needs to end, a door of opportunity that must open, a healing that must come, and then setting your heart and body on fire with relentless pursuit. Hunger in the stomach reminds you of hunger in the spirit, and every pang becomes a prayer, every craving becomes a cry, every weakness becomes an offering. This is why it is feared, because it leaves no room for passivity. It sharpens the mind, disciplines the body, and sets the soul ablaze with purpose. The fast of fire is not always easy. In fact, it is often the most resisted. Temptations will rise, distractions will multiply, and every excuse will appear to convince you to stop. But the very resistance is proof of its power. The enemy does not fight what is powerless. He fights what is dangerous. And a person who commits to combining fasting with targeted, fiery prayer becomes dangerous to darkness. The atmosphere begins to shift when you enter a room because you are carrying concentrated spiritual authority. Demons fear this, not because of who you are, but because of what you carry when you are surrendered, focused, and burning with intention. This fast also requires discipline. It demands structure. You cannot drift into it casually. You must set times, create a plan, and stand firm. That is what makes it powerful, because discipline multiplies impact. When you rise at a set hour and choose prayer over comfort, you are telling your body that it is not in charge. When you close your mouth to food but open your mouth to heaven, you are declaring that your sustenance comes from a higher place. That rhythm creates momentum, and that momentum creates breakthrough. The fast of fire is not about starving yourself. It is about feeding your spirit. It is about trading temporary satisfaction for eternal power. Every time you choose hunger with purpose, you are fueling a fire that darkness cannot extinguish. And when the fire burns hot enough, chains break, lies collapse, and strongholds crumble. That is why this fast is feared. It unleashes a level of authority and clarity that cannot be resisted. The fast of fellowship is the reminder that true strength is never meant to stand alone. While solitude has its place and silence carries its own power, there is something extraordinary that happens when people come together with one heart, one focus, and one discipline. Darkness thrives on isolation because it knows that when a person feels alone, they are easier to discourage, easier to weaken, and easier to defeat. But when two or three commit to fasting and praying together, the weight of discouragement is shared. The fire of faith multiplies, and the courage to continue grows stronger. The fast of fellowship is not simply about doing without food at the same time as others. It is about intentionally joining with people who are hungry for breakthrough, people who are willing to sacrifice together, and people who remind each other of the mission when weakness sets in. Demons fear unity more than they fear volume, because unity creates an atmosphere where excuses die and strength is multiplied. One person fasting alone can be strong, but when they join hands with another, the effect doubles. When a group gathers in hunger and prayer, their voices rise like a wave that darkness cannot withstand. This is why attacks often come in the form of division, petty arguments, or mistrust, because the enemy knows that a united group is a weapon sharper than any blade. The fast of fellowship builds accountability, and accountability brings endurance. When you know someone else is standing with you, it becomes harder to give up, harder to slip back into old habits, harder to surrender to temptation. You are reminded that your sacrifice is not only for yourself, but for the strength of those around you. This practice transforms fasting from a personal struggle into a shared victory. Imagine a family fasting together for healing, a group of friends fasting for direction, a community fasting for revival. What begins as individual hunger turns into collective power. Fellowship takes the focus off of me and places it on us. And when us becomes the center, pride loses its grip, selfishness dissolves, and love becomes the bond that holds the group together. The fast of fellowship teaches humility, because you realize that your journey is not just about your own breakthrough, but about lifting others as well. In fellowship fasting, every weakness becomes an opportunity for encouragement. When one is tired, another lifts them. When one feels like quitting, another speaks life. This cycle creates a shield that is impossible for darkness to penetrate. Demons cannot whisper lies of isolation to someone who is constantly reminded that they are not alone. They cannot convince you that your effort is meaningless when the people around you are sharing in the very same sacrifice. The fast of fellowship is powerful because it builds community, and community is unshakable when its foundation is sacrifice. It teaches people to run together instead of stumbling apart, to push forward instead of falling back, and to celebrate victories not as individuals but as a united body. When people fast together, they become a living testimony that strength is multiplied in unity, and that is why this discipline is so greatly feared. Fasting is often misunderstood because people reduce it to nothing more than a diet or a health trick, something measured only by calories lost or pounds shed. But fasting has never been about food alone. It is about discipline, mastery, and realignment. The power of fasting lies not in what leaves your plate, but in what enters your spirit. Anyone can skip meals, but fasting is more than deprivation. It is transformation. It teaches you that you are more than your cravings, more than your urges, more than the cycle of desire and indulgence that so often controls human life. When you fast with the right intention, you are declaring that your body is not your master, your appetite is not your God, and your comfort is not the final authority over your choices. That shift in perspective creates a strength no diet plan can offer. The truth is, food is only a symbol in fasting. The stomach is the training ground, but the battlefield is the mind and spirit. Every time you feel hunger and choose to remain in discipline, you are exercising control over the self. That control spills into every other area of life. Your speech, your thoughts, your reactions, your habits. Suddenly you discover that the same strength that allowed you to say no to food can help you say no to anger, to temptation, to laziness, to fear. Fasting is not punishment for the body, it is training for the soul. The body may grow weak for a time, but the spirit becomes sharp, alive, and sensitive to truth in ways it never was before. This is why fasting cannot be reduced to ritual. It must be carried out with purpose. If someone fasts only to prove a point or follow tradition, the deeper work never happens. But when fasting is done with the intention to grow closer to the higher calling, to sharpen focus, to strengthen discipline, then it becomes a tool of transformation. Demons do not fear hunger for hunger's sake, but they tremble when hunger becomes fuel for clarity, obedience, and spiritual power. Because it is not about what leaves your stomach. It is about what enters your spirit when you choose to align with purpose. Fasting also reveals attachments. The moment you try to let go of food or comfort, you realize how much control it had over you. The cravings, the irritability, the excuses, all of it rises to the surface. That is not failure, that is revelation. Fasting exposes what has been hidden, showing you where your true loyalties lie. And once you see it, you have the chance to take authority over it. That exposure is frightening to the enemy, because once you see the chain, you can break it. At its core, fasting teaches mastery. It reminds you that you are not a slave to impulse, that discipline is possible, and that freedom comes through intentional sacrifice. It is not about losing weight. It is about losing weakness. It is not about skipping food. It is about skipping excuses. It is about building a resilience that no temptation can easily shake. That is why fasting is not about food alone. It is about realigning every part of your being to stand in strength, clarity, and power. Victory through discipline is the essence of fasting, the fruit of every sacrifice, the proof that strength is not built in comfort, but in challenge. Discipline is the bridge between desire and achievement, and fasting is one of the purest ways to walk across that bridge. When you choose to deny yourself what your body cries out for, you are building a strength that cannot be faked. You are training yourself to resist not only food, but every form of weakness that life throws at you. Victory does not come by accident. It comes through practice, through training, through choosing again and again to stand firm when everything in you wants to give in. Fasting teaches that kind of victory because it demands that you fight small battles daily. And those small battles prepare you for the larger ones that will surely come. The beauty of discipline is that it multiplies. If you can train yourself to control your appetite, you will find yourself more capable of controlling your thoughts, your words, your reactions. Self-mastery in one area spills into every other part of life. This is why fasting is feared by darkness. Because once a person realizes they are not a prisoner of desire, they become free to make choices that build strength, truth, and destiny. The enemy relies on people being slaves to impulse, falling every time temptation knocks. But when you learn discipline through fasting, you are no longer controlled by the immediate. You learn to see beyond the craving, beyond the comfort, beyond the temporary pull, and you stand on the foundation of something greater. Discipline also brings clarity. The more you say no to distraction, the clearer your vision becomes. Most people live in a fog because they have never learned to deny themselves. They are pulled in every direction by every desire. But fasting cuts through that fog like a blade. It forces you to choose to prioritize, to focus on what truly matters, and in that focus lies victory. You no longer waste your energy chasing what is meaningless. You pour it into what builds you, what strengthens you, what fulfills your purpose. That kind of focus is terrifying to darkness because it cannot be easily broken. Victory through discipline also builds endurance. Anyone can make a single bold decision, but only discipline can make you consistent. And consistency is where true power lies. It is not about how loud you can shout once. It is about how steady you can walk every day. Fasting trains consistency because every day you must choose to continue, even when the initial excitement fades. That endurance creates resilience, and resilience makes you unstoppable. No temptation, no distraction, no attack can easily shake a person who has learned the discipline of fasting. At the heart of it all, victory through discipline proves that you are greater than your weaknesses. You are not a victim of appetite, not a slave to cravings, not a prisoner of comfort. You are a master of your choices, a steward of your destiny, a warrior who is trained in the fire of sacrifice. That is the victory fasting gives, the kind that darkness fears, the kind that builds unshakable strength, and the kind that no one can take away from you.